Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, March 24th, 2025. The Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg says that Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and other senior Trump administration officials mistakenly included him in a discussion on an unsecure app about war plans against the Houthis. U.S. Court of Appeals hears the case involving the alleged Venezuelan gang members' deportation flights and whether the Trump administration violated a federal judge's order to pause them. President Trump holds his third cabinet meeting at the White House, joined by Elon Musk to discuss his Department of Government Efficiency cost-cutting, and Cabinet Secretaries provide examples of what they say are wasteful contracts that have been eliminated. House and Senate Republican leaders plan to meet this week to work out differences in the budget reconciliation bill that could contain tax cuts, border security measures, energy promotion, and the rest of the Republican agenda. We'll get an update from Reese Gorman, reporter with NOTUS. President Trump announces Hyundai will build a $5 billion steel-making plant in Louisiana. Canadian party leaders gear up for a snap election in a month, and President Trump's tariff policy is a primary issue. And former Congresswoman Mia Love has passed away. She was the first black Republican woman ever elected to Congress. From CBS News, top Trump officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Vice President J.D. Vance, allegedly discussed the details of a highly sensitive operation to bomb Houthi targets in Yemen in a group chat that inadvertently included Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Goldberg wrote on Monday. As a cabinet meeting unfolded at the White House on Monday afternoon, Goldberg published a piece detailing how he was added to the chat on the encrypted messaging app Signal earlier this month by an account sharing the name of White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Later, Goldberg said an account named Pete Hegseth laid out a plan for strikes in Yemen that included precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing of an attack shortly before it took place. The National Security Council stated the messages seemed to be authentic in a statement to CBS after the story was published. President Trump was asked about this during an afternoon White House event on a different subject.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis?
Correct.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
President Donald Trump at the White House. At one point in the group chat, as reported by The Atlantic, Vice President Vance wrote, "I think we are making a mistake. I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself. But there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc." That was the message from Vice President J.D. Vance, as reported from The Atlantic. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, on the Senate floor, called for an investigation.
Earlier today, The Atlantic magazine released a stunning and alarming report about the accidental leaking of the Trump administration's coordination on classified military operations targeting the Houthis in Yemen. According to the report, a member of the press was somehow added to an unsecure text chain with the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the CIA Director, and other national security officials. The text chain was not a secure conversation. The app used is not approved for discussing classified military operations. Nevertheless, on this text chain, conversations went at length about imminent military operations, including specific targets, weapons, and attack plans. These text messages very likely included classified U.S. intelligence. And the entire time, nobody seemed to realize that a private citizen without security clearance had access to this conversation. Mr. President, this is one of the most stunning breaches of military intelligence I have read about in a very, very long time. What we have here are senior U.S. leaders, including the Vice President and Secretary of Defense, having classified discussions of military action over an unsecure app. It's bad enough that a private citizen was added to this chain, but it's far worse that sensitive military information was exchanged on an unauthorized application, especially when that sensitive military information was so important. If these detailed exchanges about coordinating military operations fell into the hands of America's enemies, it could get people killed. It could severely harm our military. It would put America's national security in danger. This debacle requires a full investigation into how this happened, the damage it created, and how we can avoid it in the future. If our nation's military secrets are being peddled around over unsecured text chains, we need to know that at once, and we need to put a stop to it immediately. Every single senator, Republican and Democrat, and independent, must demand accountability. If a government employee shared sensitive military plans like this, they'd be investigated and face very harsh consequences. Again, this kind of carelessness is how people get killed. It's how our enemies can take advantage of us. It's how our national security falls into danger. If you were up in arms over unsecure emails years ago, you should certainly be outraged by this amateurish behavior.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. This is a story from The Hill. The Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, says Republican senators will get to the bottom of how Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, got added to a group chat among senior Trump administration national security officials, during which classified details about a military strike against Houthi rebels were disclosed. Thune told reporters, when asked if he was concerned about the leak and whether the Senate would investigate the security breach, "We're just finding out about it, but obviously we've got to run it to ground and figure out what went on there. We'll have a plan." Thune spoke to reporters shortly after Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, a senior member of the Intelligence Committee, called the inadvertent inclusion of a journalist on a group chat of senior national security officials a huge screw-up. That was from The Hill. From Associated Press, President Donald Trump on Monday questioned the impartiality of the federal judge who blocked his plans to deport Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador, leveling his criticism only hours before his administration will ask an appeals court to lift the judge's order. Just after midnight, President Trump posted a social media message calling for Chief Judge James Boasberg to be disbarred. Trump reposted an article about Boasberg's attendance at a legal conference purportedly featured, quote, anti-Trump speakers. The judge, meanwhile, refused Monday to throw out his original order before an appeals court hearing for the case. Boasberg ruled that the immigrants facing deportation must get an opportunity to challenge their designations as alleged members of the Tren-de-Aragua gang. That was from Associated Press. The oral argument before the U.S. Court of Appeals, D.C. Circuit, was heard today. Here's part of that. Judge Patricia Millett questioning Drew Ensign, Deputy Assistant Attorney General.
It seems like the relevant thing is where people being removed solely, not detained, but removed solely based on the proclamation. It seemed like, and again, you can clarify for me, I'm just looking at a cold record here, that the proclamation was signed and people were getting put on planes immediately without even notice as to the basis, let alone an opportunity to file suit. And so were those removals, I think there was one airplane that you said it was people were removed on other grounds, but there were two where the government hasn't argued that. Am I recalling the record correctly?
Your Honor, I believe so. I mean,
Two planes worth of people removed under the AEA, not under withholding of removal process, or removal of the ordinary INA removal.
The Title 8 process. Yes, Your Honor. But I think the fact is that 5 individual plaintiffs were able to march into court, file habeas, actually get relief, admittedly on non-habeas grounds. And the fact that opportunity.
Without the government, I mean, that was a super fast order that was done, as you know. I mean, the government was called and notified, and then a hearing that afternoon. But that's one of the reasons there's all these separate disputes in district court about compliance, because planes were already loading and taken off. And those folks did not have notice or an opportunity to challenge their status at all. And that's why there's had to be a class certification to slow things down until we have an opportunity for due process.
Your Honor, I think this court's decision in IM versus CBP is instructive on this.
Am I wrong about anything I just said factually?
Your Honor, I think it's incorrect that they couldn't have gone into court as the 5 individual plaintiffs.
No, but the point here was that there were plane loads of people. I mean, it's a class action. There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here, where the proclamation required the promulgation of regulations, and they had hearing boards before people were removed. And yet here, there's nothing in there about hearing boards. There's no regulations, and nothing was adopted by the agency officials that were administering this. People weren't given notice. They weren't told where they were going. And they were given, those people on those planes on that Saturday had no opportunity to file habeas or any type of action to challenge the removal under the AEA. And like you've agreed that 2 of those airplanes, people were removed under the AEA. What's factually wrong about what I said?
Well, Your Honor, we certainly dispute the Nazi analogy, but more importantly, the fact is that individual plaintiffs were able to file habeas in time in order to secure relief.
Drew Ensign, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, questioned by Federal Judge Patricia Millett at D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in the case JGG v. Donald Trump about whether a lower court can address the Trump administration's efforts to deport Venezuelan nationals via the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. The U.S. border czar, Tom Homan, came out to speak with reporters in the White House driveway and was asked about that Nazi analogy.
Tom, can I ask you about what the federal appeals judge is saying there? They said, noting that alleged Nazis were given better treatment during World War II than the Trump administration treated Venezuelan.
Well, that's first of all, it's ridiculous. It's just another example of a radical judge saying something that's just disgusting, to compare anything to the Nazis. The Holocaust. We follow the law. The Alien Enemies Act is clear. A law that was passed by Congress, signed by the president. We're following, unlike last administration, we're actually following the law. What we did on those planes, we removed terrorists. MS-13 and TDA were our designated terrorist organization. We removed terrorists. And to compare that any way whatsoever with Nazis is disgusting on every level.
U.S. border czar Tom Homan speaking to reporters in the White House driveway. U.S. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, told Fox News today that his committee will be holding hearings next week on the issue of, quote, activist judges, and the House may vote on a bill to limit nationwide injunctions.
2.5 weeks ago in the Judiciary Committee bill, we passed legislation which said instead of these federal district judges issuing an injunction that applies to the entire country, we think it should be limited to the parties of the case in that respective jurisdiction. It's Congressman Ice's bill. It's a good piece of legislation. We passed it 2.5 weeks ago. Speaker Johnson's indicated he'd like to get this bill to the floor next week and move it through the process. So we think there's some things that we can do legislatively. And then, frankly, there's the broader issue of all these judges' injunctions and then decisions like Judge Boasberg, what he's trying to do and how that case is working. We're going to have hearings on all of that because particularly when you look at Judge Boasberg, it starts to look like this is getting totally political from this guy, particularly when you remember he's also the judge who was part of the whole Trump-Russia FISA court granting those warrants that allowed the Comey FBI to spy on President Trump's campaign. So we're going to look at that issue as well. But hopefully we can get that bill passed next week on the House floor, move it to the Senate, hopefully get it to the president's desk.
House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, today on Fox News. New York Post writes that President Trump on Monday appointed his former personal attorney, Alina Habba, to serve as interim U.S. attorney in New Jersey, with Habba vowing to clean up corruption in her home state. Habba, 40 years old, became a public figure while repping Trump in a defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll between the president's terms of office, and has held the senior role as presidential counselor since January. That was from the New York Post. Alina Habba spoke to reporters in the White House driveway today.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm sure you've seen President Trump has just put out a statement that he has appointed me as the interim U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey, my home state. As you know, I've stood by President Trump, his family, the organization, and many other clients in that state where I've been born and raised, and I'm raising my babies now. But there is corruption, there is injustice, and there is a heavy amount of crime right in Cory Booker's backyard and right under Governor Murphy, and that will stop. I look forward to working with Pam Bondi and with the Department of Justice and making sure that we further the president's agenda of putting America first, cleaning up mess, and going after the people that we should be going after, not the people that are falsely accused. That will stop in the great state of New Jersey starting now. Thank you so much.
Who are the people that you want to go after?
We'll see when I get in there. We got to see what's going in. I know you'd love that narrative. Let me be very clear.
You mentioned politicians.
I didn't actually.
Cory Booker and Governor Murphy.
Correct, because I think Cory Booker and Governor Murphy have failed the state of New Jersey. If you look at what happened in crime, what's going on in Newark, what's going on in Camden, this has been a neglected state. It is one of the most populated states for its size, and it needs to stop. We're going to do a bang-up job. I cannot wait. It's a great honor.
How long is
Thank
your
you all.
appointment for?
Thank you very much.
Why did the president?
Alina, do you have any more information on this U.S. attorney who died? I know she died of natural causes.
No, I do not at that time, but I do pray for her family, and I hope she rests in peace. That was tragic.
Why did you get the White House then?
I will be leaving the White House soon and going to New Jersey to serve in my current role and my new role. I'm
This
excited.
isn't ahead of some statewide ambition, political ambition, or is it just?
Thank you all so much. I'm excited. I'll see you in Jersey.
Why didn't you appoint you permanently?
Alina Habba speaking to reporters outside the White House, leaving her position as counselor to the president and becoming interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey. President Trump, in his Truth Social post announcing this job switch, also included this. Additionally, John Giordano, who has done a terrific job as interim U.S. attorney in New Jersey, will now be nominated as the new ambassador to Namibia. This is Washington Today. Story from the New York Times. The majority of the Supreme Court appeared ready on Monday to allow Louisiana to continue using a congressional voting map that includes 2 majority black districts in the state. The question before the court: did Louisiana lawmakers improperly rely on race when they drafted the map? The case could not only shift the boundaries of majority black districts in Louisiana, but also help determine the balance of power in the House of Representatives in the coming years, when political control of the chamber has frequently rested on thin margins. Using the new map to hold elections in 2024, Louisiana elected a second black Democrat, Cleo Fields, the first time in a decade the Democrats have held 2 congressional seats in the state. That was from the New York Times. Here's part of the oral argument before the Supreme Court. Justice Elena Kagan questioning attorney Edward Grime.
What should Louisiana have done? Louisiana litigated this case. It lost in the district court. It lost twice in the circuit court. If I read the list of the judges, I'm just going to tell you that if you lose those judges, you're going to lose. We had no interest in taking the case. It was brought to us. We said no. What was Louisiana supposed to do?
Well, I think in this case, the Fifth Circuit laid out the options. I mean, first of all, Louisiana had no reason to think. I mean, the same illustrious list of judges pointed out that you can start over again. You can retool and maybe don't use Allen v. Milligan as the roadmap this time. I mean, that hint was clearly given to the state. And
so I guess I get the idea that it did have the option to keep on finding ways to litigate this question. But there were ways that it could have refused to give up. I take that point. But at some point it said, we've been told we're wrong by 7 judges, and we're going to accept that, and we're going to move on and find a map. And then the state lawyers come in, and the record is like the state lawyer says there can be no better reasons to believe that the VRA required a second majority black district than a precedential opinion of the Fifth Circuit affirming that a map with a single majority black district likely violated Section 2. And the state lawyer talks about all the process that they went through and the hearing that they had and the maps that were submitted. And she says, what better reason could there be for this? So, like, at a certain point, like, I get that there might have been other options, but that's the whole point about breathing room, right? Breathing room is states have choices. And this was one state that decided on this choice that you don't agree with, but it was like well within the parameters of like a good faith, reasonable choice.
Justice Kagan, if that were true, then what the state should have done is brought that before the district court. What the state argued in the district court is that Robinson's mere existence was dispositive, that we were essentially stopped from even bringing our claim for that reason. And so if the evidence was so compelling in Robinson, all they had to do was use their trial time. They didn't even use all their trial time and show us the key points.
Attorney Edward Grime being questioned by Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan in today's case. The Hill, writing about it, says the federal government did not participate in the dispute, a rare stance for a major redistricting case. The Biden-era Justice Department had planned to participate to argue that the lower court committed significant legal errors in striking down Louisiana's new map, but the Trump administration abandoned the position. Also, some news on the Supreme Court from CBS News. The court declined to take up a case brought by casino mogul and Trump donor Steve Wynn that would have challenged a landmark decision that established a higher standard for public figures to successfully sue for defamation. Supreme Court on Monday formally declined to consider Wynn's request to revisit the court's decision in a case known as New York Times Company v. Sullivan as part of Wynn's legal battle against the Associated Press. And from Bloomberg, President Donald Trump said he expected efforts to slash the size of the federal government's workforce would bring it down to an appropriate level in the next 2 to 3 months, as he met with billionaire advisor Elon Musk and cabinet officials on Monday. Donald Trump said at the cabinet meeting at the White House, "We're getting down to the point. We think probably over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll be pretty much satisfied with the people that are working hard and want to be members of the administration and our country." That was from Bloomberg. The president also focused on the reduction in government contracts that he said amounted to fraud. Here's a portion of the cabinet meeting. You're also going to hear from Elon Musk, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, and SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler.
To me, something that was just terrible is the contracts that we're finding, the fraudulent contracts that we're finding where millions and millions of dollars and even billions of dollars in some cases were given out. And I think we'll start with that. I'd like to start with Doug Burgum, Secretary of the Interior. He told us about a couple of contracts that we have now found. When he got there, they saw this with Chris and everybody, and they couldn't believe it. Doug, could you just relate what you told us a little while ago?
No, happy to, Mr. President. There's a federal consulting group, which was a group inside of Interior, but it was managing contracts from many different agencies that flowed through here. One of those contracts was to do surveys of individuals, $830 million for surveys. And so part of the question was, hey, could we actually see the surveys? And then the surveys came back, and a survey was like 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 10 questions that anyone's child in junior high could have put together, or AI could have done for free. $830 million. So that's one that we've stopped, and that contract was going out after you were inaugurated, sir. So it was
so
jumping.
It's a pure fraud.
Yeah,
it's a fraud. But we've had many fraudulent contracts that were caught by the work that Elon and his people are doing, and working with our people. It's been brought to light that the fraud, not just waste and abuse, the fraud has been incredible. You mentioned one, Madam Secretary.
Well, yes, sir. Well, let me just add to that, and thank you. We just had a wonderful cabinet meeting, all aligned on certainly the effort to realign the government. But even at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we've canceled a $300,000 contract educating on food justice for queer and transgender farmers in San Francisco. A similar contract we canceled in New York, again, educating transgender and queer farmers on food justice justice and food equality. I'm not even sure what that means, but apparently the last administration wanted to put our taxpayer dollars towards that. We canceled a $600,000 contract out of Louisiana that was studying the menstrual cycles of transgender men, a $600,000 contract. We canceled another contract out of a university in the middle of the country that focused on getting more diversity, equity, and inclusion into our pest management industry. Again, these are nonsensical. It makes zero sense to use taxpayer dollars to fund these. I know these are just a few examples of the hundreds and hundreds that we have found.
Well, a clear case of fraud was with the Small Business Administration, where they were handing out loans, $330 million worth of loans to people under the age of 11. I think the youngest, Kelly, was a 9-month-old who got a $100,000 loan. That's a very precocious baby we're talking about here.
Well, we're tackling the fraud, waste, and abuse in the agency. We've seen, hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud go unprosecuted, so we're taking that on. We have a zero tolerance policy for fraud, and we continue to crack down on it and make sure people are held accountable.
It's amazing. And you have a lot of that. You found far too much of it. It's a pure fraud. We like to use the words waste and abuse because they sort of sound good, but many of these things are pure fraud.
President Donald Trump with cabinet members at today's White House meeting. From ABC News, the Trump administration likely violated federal law when it gave Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency seemingly unfettered access to records from the Department of Education, Treasury Department, and Office of Personnel Management. A federal judge said on Monday. U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman issued an injunction blocking Doge from accessing any personally identifiable information maintained by the three agencies, determining the access violated the Administrative Procedure Act and Privacy Act of 1974. At the end of the cabinet meeting, President Trump thanked Elon Musk, calling him a patriot. Musk then thanked the president and mentioned that Doge employees have been getting death threats.
On a daily basis, just trying to do the right thing for the American taxpayer and for the American people. Just a thank you to the Doge team who are literally getting death threats and being accosted, and these are, a lot of them are just kids. They're just trying to help out, and they're very talented. They could get jobs for millions of dollars a year. Instead, they come here, earn peanuts, and get death threats. So thanks to the Doge team.
Thanks.
Elon Musk at the end of today's cabinet meeting at the White House. On the Senate floor, the Minority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke about Doge.
For 60 days, Donald Trump has waged a campaign of destruction against America's very, very foundations. Each step of the way, Leader Thune and the Republican majority have enabled his every whim. In just the last week alone, among many other things that he did that hurt the country, he has, one, he has created pandemonium at the Social Security Administration. And two, he has signed an executive order closing down the Department of Education. Let me discuss each briefly. When it comes to the Department of Education, of course Donald Trump cannot proceed without an act of Congress. That's the law. Let me be clear. Let me be very clear. If Republicans ever try to move a bill through the Senate that shuts down the Department of Education, Senate Democrats will halt it in its tracks. It will go nowhere. It will be dead on arrival. On Social Security, Senate Republicans should do their jobs and stand up to Donald Trump and Elon Musk's reckless behavior. In just a few days, a new policy will be implemented at the Social Security Administration, preventing Americans from signing up for benefits over the phone, which they've been able to do for a very long time. Seniors who can't drive themselves or use the internet will be in danger of losing benefits. As the Wall Street Journal says, dealing with Social Security is heading from bad to worse. There's no other way to describe this new policy. It is a direct attack from Donald Trump and Elon Musk on American seniors. Just because they're not stopping the checks directly that go to people, they're stopping people from getting them in indirect ways. Just as bad when you don't have the money that you desperately need for drugs, for food, for rent. And it's all part of Doge's two-faced efforts to root out fraud within Social Security, the fraud that everyone knows does not exist. In fact, a judge last week called Doge's fraud hunt little more than a, quote, fishing expedition.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. From Politico, Speaker Mike Johnson and his leadership team urged their Senate GOP counterparts on Monday to vote swiftly on a House-approved budget framework now that lawmakers are returning to Washington after a week-long recess. The public nudge comes as GOP leaders on both sides of the Capitol feel pressured to show quick progress toward enacting President Donald Trump's agenda of tax cuts, border security enhancements, energy deregulation, and new military spending. First, however, they have to agree on the fiscal outlines of the package, and the House and Senate have approved competing blueprints. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Reese Gorman, NOTUS politics reporter.
The Senate has passed their kind of two-bill strategy. The first bill really on their plan, which Lindsey Graham kind of spearheaded, is just kind of border energy funding, kind of the promises that Trump made on the campaign trail, kind of funding those, giving those initiatives forward. And then they want to deal with tax later on down the road. They want to push tax to a later date because, I mean, objectively, even Mike Johnson will say this, well, it is easier just to get this funding through, this border funding, this energy policies. It's easier to get that through. But in Johnson's head, the House has passed a one-bill strategy, which includes the same thing the Senate bill does, plus tax, no tax on tips, extensions of the TCJA, and all that stuff that kind of is more, not necessarily controversial, but harder to kind of get through. And Johnson's idea is that they're going to use this border funding and energy policies as kind of sweeteners to get Republicans on board, because they need near unanimous in the House, can only lose a couple votes in the Senate. So it is very, very tight margins right now. So Johnson's thinking is we're going to need some of these more the kind of red meat issues, border, energy funding, to kind of get Republicans on board with the tax bill. But they're far apart right now. They haven't really, the Senate has not moved on either one. Both the House and the Senate have passed their bills. The Senate has not moved on the House bill yet. They moved on their bill. The House has not moved on the Senate bill yet. They moved their bill. So now there's a kind of got to come together and figure out a compromise. And I mean, there's some senators that have said they won't vote for a reconciliation package unless the TCJA is made permanent. Johnson obviously has said that he wants to do that. Jason Smith said obviously they want to do that. But, I mean, that costs a lot of money, and there's Republicans in the House that think that they can't do that because of the price tag on it and because of the amount of cuts that some of these conservatives are kind of demanding in order for them to get their vote.
Something else that they will be debating is increasing the debt limit. Mm-hmm. Speaker Johnson wants that to be part of the reconciliation package. Where do Senate Republicans stand?
Yeah, I think the debt limit, especially, I mean, Mike Johnson has said that that's what he wants. Obviously, conservatives have said that's what they want, but that's going to be very tough to get done. I mean, it's already tough enough. I mean, there's some Republicans that have never voted for a debt limit increase. And obviously, this is a partisan bill. So usually you need Republicans. I mean, we saw what happened last Congress with Kevin McCarthy. He needed Democrats to kind of get this debt limit across the finish line. And reconciliations is a purely partisan bill. I mean, it'd be extremely unlikely if any Democrat votes for this bill. And so they're really kind of thinking about doing this just on their own and just raising the debt limit within reconciliation. But again, that's going to be tough because that has a price tag attached to it. Then there will be some Republicans, especially in the House, that say we're going to need to see some cuts to this before we can vote for it. So that just adds on. And so it's just very, very difficult right now. It's a lot of give and take where it's like, yes, like, would it be nice to raise the debt limit in reconciliation? Obviously, because it's kind of to get it over with. But at the same time, that just throws in a whole nother kind of slew of problems that they're going to have to deal with.
A lot to work out. They're starting this week, today. What's the timeline? When could we expect to see a final bill or passage? Yeah, I mean, so reconciliation, they want to have kind of a bill done around by the time they go on Easter recess, which is about a 2-week recess, and then they want to have a bill done by Memorial Day. And that's a very, very ambitious timeline, but that's kind of what they're looking for. That's kind of what they're going for. That's what they've been saying that they want to do. And it's an ambitious timeline, especially just given how slow things have been moving already and how tenuous this process has been and how much like kind of negotiations and arm twisting is going to happen. So it's going to be really tough, but we'll see. That's the timeline is obviously they want to have a bill ready to go by Easter, have it agreed to. They go on their 2-week recess, they come back, and they deal with it then. That's kind of the thought process right there.
Reese Gorman, politics reporter with NOTUS, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal Monday morning. Washington Today continues in a moment.
For 46 years, C-SPAN has been your unfiltered window into democracy, giving you direct access to Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House. But this public service isn't guaranteed. C-SPAN receives no government funding and relies on supporters like you. All this month, in honor of Founders Day and Brian Lamb's vision, you can help keep democracy unfiltered.
To the American people, now is the time to tune in to C-SPAN.
Donate now at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. WDSU-TV in New Orleans writes the new Hyundai steel plant worth $5 billion will be built near Donaldsonville, according to an announcement made by President Donald Trump and Governor Jeff Landry. The plant will serve as a steel supply mill for Hyundai supporting U.S. assembly plants. President Trump was joined at the White House by Louisiana's governor and members of the Louisiana congressional delegation and an executive from Hyundai.
Today we're delighted to report that Hyundai is announcing a major $5.8 billion investment in American manufacturing. In particular, Hyundai will be building a brand new steel plant in Louisiana, which will produce more than 2.7 million metric tons of steel a year, creating more than 1,400 jobs for American steelworkers. And then there'll be major expansion after that. This will be Hyundai's first ever steel mill in the United States, one of the largest companies in the world, by the way, supplying steel for its auto parts and auto plants in Alabama and Georgia, which will soon produce more than 1 million American-made cars every single year. The cars are coming into this country at levels never seen before. Get ready. This investment is a clear demonstration that tariffs very strongly work, and I hope other things also, but the tariffs are bringing them in at levels that have not been witnessed. Hyundai will be producing steel in America and making its cars in America, and as a result, they'll not have to pay any tariffs. You know, there are no tariffs if you make your product in America, so it's something that's why so many people are coming.
President Donald Trump at the White House. Joining him, Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Woo-Seung Chung.
So Hyundai Motor entered the U.S. 1986. Since then, we have invested over $20 billion and now support more than 570,000 American jobs across all 15 Asian states. Today, I'm pleased to announce an additional $21 billion in a new investment over the next 4 years, our largest U.S. invest ever. A key part of this commitment is our $6 billion investment to strengthen the U.S. supply chain from steel and parts to automobiles. We are especially excited about Hyundai Steel's multi-billion investment in a new facility in Louisiana, which will create 1,300 American jobs and serve as the foundation for a more self-reliant and secure automotive supply chain in the U.S. To mark this milestone, we are honored to visit President Trump alongside Governor Landry and Speaker Johnson and Leader Scalise, deepening our partnership with the United States and reinforcing our shared vision for American industrial leadership. And this week, we are also proud to open our new $8 billion auto plant in Georgia. With this, our U.S. vehicle production will exceed 1 million units per year, as President mentioned. Our decision to invest in Savannah, Georgia, creating more than 8,500 American jobs, was initiated during my meeting with President Trump in Seoul in 2019.
That's right.
Yeah, and after that, 2020 in Davos, I mentioned about the new plant. So American Jobs was initiated during at the time. Now, as we proudly mark the completion of this transformative project, coincides with the beginning of President Trump's second term, making this moment even more special.
Woo-Sin Chung, Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair, today at the White House. Story from ABC News. President Donald Trump's plan for reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd is expected to be more targeted than what he has threatened previously. But the situation remains fluid, and the plan is still under discussion. Sources familiar with the plan told ABC News the April tariffs would still be a significant increase in U.S. tariffs and are expected to strain relations with U.S. allies, but it will likely be narrower than what Trump had previously said. In February, Trump ordered federal agencies to look into virtually every U.S. trading partner to evaluate what reciprocal tariff rate to put on them. That's reporting from ABC News. President Trump was asked about tariffs today. He said, "I may give a lot of countries breaks. It's reciprocal, but we might be even nicer than that." Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, writes NBC News, has called for a snap election amid a festering trade war and annexation threats from U.S. President Trump. Carney, who was elected by the Liberal Party earlier this month to replace Justin Trudeau following his resignation, called the election for April 28th, saying he needs a strong mandate to deal with tariffs issued by the Trump administration and the threat they pose to Canada's economy. That was from NBC News. The Prime Minister made the announcement on Sunday.
There is so much more to do to secure Canada, to invest in Canada, to build Canada, to unite Canada. That's why I'm asking for a strong, positive mandate from my fellow Canadians. I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th. And she has agreed. We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty. Our response must be to build a strong economy and a more secure Canada. President Trump claims that Canada isn't a real country. He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons. We have to look out for ourselves. We have to look out for each other.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party, on Sunday. The party in Canada with the second greatest number of seats currently in Parliament is the Conservatives. Its leader, Pierre Poilievre, responded Sunday to the call for a snap election.
The Liberals are asking for a fourth term in power. After swapping Justin Trudeau for his economic advisor and hand-picked successor, Mark Carney. But after the lost Liberal decade, the question is whether Canadians can afford a fourth Liberal term. After these out-of-touch Liberals inflated housing costs, drove up the cost of food, pushed 2 million people to food banks, unleashed crime on our streets, ruined our immigration system, blocked our resources, sent $500 billion to the United States, and made our economy more reliant on the Americans than ever before? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, honor hard work, build homes, cut taxes, lock up criminals, secure our borders, unleash resources to bring home our jobs, and stand up to Donald Trump from a position of strength? Now, on that subject, I know a lot of people are worried, angry, and anxious, and with good reason, as a result of the president's unacceptable threats against our country. You worry about your job and the sovereignty of our nation. And you're angry at the feeling of betrayal that these unacceptable words and tariffs have made us all experience. I share your anger and I share the worry for our future. But I also draw great resolve in knowing that we can transform the anxiety and anger into action. First of all, let me be clear. We will never be an American state. We will always be a sovereign and self-reliant country.
Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, on Sunday. Story from Newsweek. With the general election just over a month away, polls show the race essentially neck and neck as of Sunday. Polling aggregator 338 Canada had the Liberal Party at 39%, the Conservative Party at 37%, and New Democratic Party at 11%. The Liberal Party's lead falls within the margin of error, which is plus or minus 4 percentage points. Wall Street today, the Dow up 597, NASDAQ up 404, S&P up 100. Reuters reports that U.S. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who said earlier this month he had asked the government efficiency team led by Elon Musk for assistance with a number of issues, is resigning effective Monday, the agency said. And from CNN, the White House will nominate Dr. Susan Monares, the current acting director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to lead the agency. According to a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services official, the move comes weeks after the White House abruptly withdrew its nomination of Dr. Dave Weldon to lead the public health agency. Greenland's people are bracing for another visit from U.S. President Donald Trump's inner circle, writes Associated Press, with Second Lady Vance set to travel to the autonomous Danish territory this week as her husband ratchets up talk about U.S. security and territorial interest in the vast Arctic island coveted by the administration. President Trump was asked about this visit.
Greenland is confused about the Second Lady and the National Security Advisor visiting this week. They're concerned that this is further provocation, whatever it is you ultimately want for Greenland. Could you further explain why they're going? What is the ultimate end goal when it comes to Greenland?
Yeah, well, not provocation. This is friendliness, not provocation. We're dealing with a lot of people from Greenland that would like to see something happen with respect to their being properly protected and properly taken care of. They're calling us, we're not calling them. And we were invited over there, and I thought it would be I have great respect for the wife of our great vice president. I think she's a brilliant woman. She's a very nice woman, and she loves the concept of Greenland. And so she's going there, and I think Marco's going there, and some others are going there. But we've been invited, and they really like the idea because they have been somewhat abandoned, as you know. They haven't been taken good care of. And I think Greenland's going to be something that maybe is in our future. I think it's important. It's important from the standpoint of international security. And if you look at the ships outside of Greenland, you have Russia, you have China, you have lots of different people and lots of different places, and it cannot go on the way it is. It's not going to go on the way it is. I'll make a statement. It's not going to happen. So they're going there, and that's purely friendship.
Who's doing the inviting? You said people.
A lot of people, yeah. People from Greenland are asking us to go there. We have many, many requests from many, many people, some officials too.
President Donald Trump at his cabinet meeting at the White House today. Again, from Associated Press, Greenland's prime minister warned Sunday of American aggression and lamented a mess caused by the upcoming visit from Vance. And finally, on C-SPAN Radio's Washington Today, also from AP, former U.S. Congresswoman Mia Love of Utah, a daughter of Haitian immigrants who became the first black Republican woman elected to Congress, died Sunday. She was 49. Love's family posted news of the death on Love's X account. She had undergone recent treatment for brain cancer. In 2023, Mia Love was on C-SPAN's program Afterwards on Book TV, talking about her book, Qualified, Finding Your Voice, Leading with Character, and Empowering Others. And she spoke about being the only Republican to join the Congressional Black Caucus.
A lot of people said, don't do it, Mia. It's not going to be, they're not going to like you. It's not going to be comfortable. Your policies do not align. You know, just stick with the conference. Well, I was in the conference, the GOP conference, but then I decided that maybe I would just take a chance and join. And I met up with Marsha Fudge, who ended up becoming she was my chosen big sister there. I had Paul Ryan, who was my mentor, and big brother, who I would go to for advice and help. But I also had Marsha Fudge, which made me so much more well-rounded. But there's a great example that came from that, where Cedric Richmond, on the way to the State of the Union, we talked, he said, you know, we see so much, we see so many things in the same way. Why are you a Republican? I said, because of the stories that my dad would tell me about why it's important that people have power and that we don't centralize power, and dictators and people who are able to have too much power in the highest levels of government is so bad for people. And I also said that being a mayor, a city council, I found that the most efficient, the most effective solutions are found at the most local level. I was able to address issues very quickly. And the closer you get decision making to people, the better it is. And Cedric told me, he's like, I understand that. He's like, I think differently because the local level is what kept my family, ancestors from having the ability to vote, they were the ones that chased us down in the streets, that didn't give us the rights. And we had to go to the federal government to finally make sure that the states allowed us to vote without fear of harm or being jailed. And I got him. We got each other because we saw the perspectives from each other's point of view. And it made it so that we looked out for each other and we found ways to work together and things that we could agree on.
Former Congresswoman Mia Love in 2023 on C-SPAN's Book TV. She died Sunday at age 49 from brain cancer. She served 2015 through 19. She lost re-election in 2018. A lot of tributes coming in. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, tweeting, "Please join me in praying for the Love family and remembering Mia Love as a friend, trailblazer, congresswoman, wife, mother, and patriot. May she rest in peace, and may the great things she worked for in this life inspire the people of Utah and all Americans to better serve each other, our families, and our country." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.